Hi everyone, welcome to my review of Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes in 2001. So here we are, finally, with a Tim Burton, kind of reboot of the classic, film Planet of the Apes. Of course, I've been going through this set. This one actually wasn't watched on this. I've got the DVD here. This is of course the Tim Burton version. I watched it on Sky because it's actually an option for better quality. The others aren't on Sky, so I had to go for the DVDs. But at least it was HD. But yes, now this film, I've probably mentioned a couple of times on my channel, comments and actually on the reviews. I don't like this film. Well, I never used to like it. That is, and it's hard to think if any of them are worse for me than this version. I think when I watched it as a kid, it was after I watched the '68, of course, version. Absolute classic, amazing masterpiece. And I'd seen probably one or two of the sequels. It was probably Escape that I saw all the way through back then. I liked that, and I loved the original. Now, when I watched this one, I really did not like it. And actually, of course, I put it on my 100 least favourite films list that I've kind of been making for the last year or so. And it's not necessarily the very, very worst ones, but the ones that I hate the most. And this has always been on it. But I haven't seen it for about 10 years. And then, of course, tonight I rewatched it, directed by Tim Burton, who, just get out of the way. I've done a couple of his reviews now, the films. Sleepy Hollow, for me, is a masterpiece. I think Corpse Bride was decent, it's a good film, had a lot of flaws. I don't like, his remakes in general, and his later films, a lot of them. But yes, Dark Shadows, for example, as well. Near into that bad mark. I actually thought it was a pretty bad film overall. But Edward Scissorhands, one of my top 50 films of all time, probably. That's how much I love that film. Life-changing film for me. Perfection. Tim Burton really can achieve masterful, cinema when he's on form, and mostly that was, last century, you could say. But yes, this film, it's just one of his remakes, and from what I remembered, it was my least favourite of the remakes I've seen of him. Even worse than Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, which I hated as well, unfortunately. So here we are. Now, what do I think of this film? After rewatching it, now that I'm, kind of grown up, I know about film a lot more than I did back then, of course. And I've got to watch this film now and as well compare it, in succession with the previous entries, and see what it does for the franchise, and just as a film on its own. What do I think of it now? Now that I've rewatched it, properly sat down again and watched it. I still detest this film. It is that simple. I absolutely hate this film. I just cannot describe how much this depresses me. How it kind of is so bizarre. One of the most pointless films ever made. Much respect to Tim Burton and all involved. There's a great cast here. Potential. Danny Elfman. He kind of scores this film. So you've got great potential. Of course. Tim Burton, when he's on form, as I said, a master director, and this was, after, say, Sleepy Hollow and stuff, so you could say this was one of his first films that was really a complete travesty, and for me, it is a disgrace, really, overall. I absolutely hated it from start to finish, really, apart from when they're on the ship. So they start off, in the year 2029, and yeah, this is it's nothing bad, this stuff, in the spaceship, and Mark Wahlberg, of course, he plays, I think, Leo Davidson, is the main protagonist of the film. The character we're meant to root for, meant to understand his motivations, or kind of there could be some mystery there. That's how cinema works. You don't always have to reveal the motivations of protagonists, but either way they do it. It has to be compelling, and not in this film. And Mark Wahlberg gives one of the greatest performances of all time in Boogie Nights. The Departed, he is on form. He is amazing in that film. He was also very good, good in The Fighter. Christian Bale was better, but yes, he can be great. In this film, he gives an absolute non-existent performance. The only one that's worse probably is The Happening that he's given, that I've seen, and absolutely awful. Just going to put it bluntly, the performances in this film are all bad, or at least just underwhelming. You've got Michael Clarke Duncan, who can be a great actor. Nothing really given to him. Paul Giamatti is just as annoying as anything. Yeah, and we'll get to the performances, but yes, basically this bit at the beginning, the prologue. These astronauts in 2029, and this chimp basically, goes off, and his ship, and then into this electrical storm, and Mark Wahlberg kind of shows his humanity, and he kind of wants to go and save him, and basically he heads on out in his kind of craft, away from the rest of the team that are in this ship, and basically the storm in some way time travels them, and they basically Mark Wahlberg ends up on this planet, and it's set many years ahead, and yes, of course, once again where apes rule, humans are treated as slaves, but this time you've got from the 1968 classic, compared to this is really something else. You've got one of the most depressing, lifeless, soulless films I've ever seen. You've got one that is just so bizarre, it doesn't get the kind of portrayal of the apes right at all. It just is full of either over-the-top performances or ones that are completely non-existent and kind of just nothing, and then of course Danny Elfman, not really utilised here. It's not a very good score from here actually. Just does the basics. The cinematography is disgraceful. Now people have praised the costumes and the kind of makeup and everything. I don't really. I think some of the armour was decent, but the whole portrayal of these apes, and Tim Burton as a director, he usually makes dark films, not to say depressing films. They're not, when they're on, and when he's at his best, they're very different to that. They're full of hope and everything. Edward Scissorhands, not a depressing film, a dark film at times, but this one is just completely dull, depressing, and that contributes, the fact that the apes are all kind of evil in this film, or just annoying, but the way they're portrayed through the makeup and everything, is very too much for me. Exaggerated, the darkness of it all, just, Fade is the villain, basically the film, played by Tim Roth, who is also, when on form, a great actor, an absolutely brilliant actor, and especially Reservoir Dogs, his best performance I've seen. In this film, I didn't, really bad performance, unfortunately. The whole thing, the writing is probably one of the worst ones as well. All the writing across the film is just dreadful. None of the actors have got anything to really go with, and it just kind of, this character Fade, so one note, it just sort of sulks around, kind of makes noises. Sometimes does stuff that completely breaks tone, jumping around, making stupid faces, and it's just so boring and one note and kind of just wholly evil, and even to the very end of the film, which then of course leads to one of the very worst endings I've ever seen in the film. But yes, basically, Fade is a crap character, just awful character, one of the worst villains I've seen in a long time, and to put it into perspective, tonight as well, I'm not reviewing it because I'm not reviewing the Friday the 13th films. I'm just going to do a ranking after seeing them all. But Friday the 13th Part 3 was better than this film, I think. Now that is something, it really is. This film was absolutely dreadful, and just, I think, when the film, it kind of opens up, it kind of, it's got some touches of humanity, with the chimp thing and everything at first. The rest of the film really lacks humanity, it lacks a soul. It just is very lifeless. Mark Wahlberg, just not good in this film, and just one of the most boring protagonists. Nothing has gotten right with this character. And he just goes. One of the things I was noticing, again when watching this, was just how poorly executed, really, the material. With this, with the way that it could have been. Just think of the '68 version, and then think of this. Nothing in this film is built up in a meaningful way for me. The tension within, for example, the first one, with kind of Charlton Heston going, and he's the only human that can talk, and then it's all kind of a massive reveal and everything, and all this kind of stuff, and it plays, the dramatic irony throughout the film, maintains the tension, the build-up, and then it just delivers on all the payoffs. This has none of that, because they all talk, the humans, basically. The apes talk, and they don't really care about the humans talking. Nothing's really explained too well as well, with the kind of, the intelligence of the humans, really as well. It's just the fact that they are kept slaves. It really, maybe I was missing something, but it isn't, well set up at all. And another thing to note, of course, is the actual, the community of it all, kind of world. planet of Ashlar, I believe it was. Just the fact that this is so uninteresting, and you've got not just the fact that it's lacking all the reveals and the kind of the tension, and everything, and the interesting elements. The actual world itself is very, very bland. It's just kind of it's nothing. It's nothing compelling to me. It really isn't. It's a very, very poor imitation of the other ones, the other Planet of the Apes films. There's not really any charm to it at all. It's just a load of boring meetings as well. I'd compare it probably to Attack of the Clones in that sense. Some of the meetings in that film and everything. It's just very, very uninteresting. The script is non-existent. Really, really bad script. And this whole world, that it's created is just, as well as cinematography, just really, really bad in this film. A lot of the time it was just very, very dull. Just all the colours gone. I couldn't even see the film at times very well. And then just, the ending battle scenes. Too much kind of dust and everything. Could barely make it out. And just very, very bad choice of colours in this film. Just dull. Very, very uninteresting. The sets I didn't like at all. They're very ugly. I think I've praised, of course, some of the armour in the film, but again, a bit too kind of evil. Making the apes look evil. But again, the makeup, I didn't like at all. Now, is there anything good about this film? Is there a single, good performance? Is there a single scene that is good? Or, a great scene at all? Is there any elements really of this film sustained for a couple of minutes that are actually good? For me, no. So really it fails on pretty much every level, and it's not quite unwatchable, or maybe not quite awful, because there is a kind of opening, and just some of the scenes weren't quite on the level of I like to save the awful rating for kind of films like Die Another Day, but yes, I could understand how this is kind of like that of the franchise. But yes, it's not quite on the level, but it is really, really bad for me. Now, of course, the kind of battle scenes at the end of the film are very, very lifeless. They're just very, very generic, and just they lack any sort of energy. And just kind of very, very underwhelming. The kind of just the very, very ending scenes as well. Now, of course, it's a very, very controversial ending. Some say it's one of the worst, and I would agree. It's an absolutely disgraceful ending. This film, you just think kind of at first you're thinking, okay, that's a bit weird. Really? And then the more you think about it, really, first of all, it could mean many different things as well when you think about it, because nothing's really been set up one specific kind of outcome, and secondly, it's very, very deliberately depressing, and just undoes the rest of the film, really, the whole kind of struggle. And then, just very, very basic, it really is just an underwhelming ending. And the more you think about it, it's one that, really, really annoys, and just kind of is one of the worst endings I've ever seen. It's so pointless, so depressing in all the worst ways. This film, is very, very depressing. It drags, on and on. There was no life or substance really to this film. There's no thought-provoking ideas really. Such a good, sense of, ideas in the original. But in this, it's just out the window. Instead, in favour of a generic action film. Really, I don't really know where this, what the point of this film was. But for me, it is a really, really bad film. I think to wrap up, I think none of the performances are good. They're either overacting or very, very bland and forgettable, non-existent. Some horrendous performances in this film. The characters are all boring for me, or just nothing really, just one note. All the companions for Mark Wahlberg's character of Leo, the kind of love triangle that goes on is just never interesting at all. Very, very boring and forced. This is just nothing is interesting in this film for me. And it just is such a lifeless film. A soulless film, one that is so devoid of any really emotion, it's devoid of any real interesting or creative ideas. It lacks any sort of momentum, and it just, really the opening and one or two other slight moments, the thing that saves it from being awful, and I think some of the armour and stuff in the film, and the weapons and everything are okay, but really most of the production is actually really bad as well for me, or just not fit into what this film should be. for me personally. And I just think Tim Burton's usual style is not here. Actually as well, it's just very very again one of his worst films, very very watered down, and just turns out dull. But as well, this is just not fitting for Planet of the Apes at all. There's no charm to it. There's no life to it. No kind of humanity really. One or two moments involving the chimp, the kind of astronaut one. The rest of it, doesn't work. Now, of course, the score is just forgettable. It's not really that. Nothing to speak of there. Once again, very underwhelming from. That's a shame. Danny Elfman, one of the greats. But yes, I hated this film. And the fact that I've rarely been this bored. In a while with a film. I think it annoys me so much. All the characters are just awful. The whole kind of bizarre feel this film has as well. There's so many moments that break the tone, because this is a very, very serious film, which is fine, but it lacks an interesting script or anything like that, or real emotion, so it fails in that. But again, it's got these moments that are very, very over the top and bizarre, and kind of ones, some of those mental moments I've seen in a film, breaks the tone so much, and it just feels very, very awkward, laughable, even though there's not really any attempts at humour in the film, it is laughable, but again, very, very unenjoyable in every way, really. I think I've ranted long enough. I think this is an absolutely, unnecessary film. Easily the worst Planet of the Apes film. There's no comparison from me personally. Battle for the Planet of the Apes, I thought was a little bit underrated, and the other ones are nowhere near as this. Beneath is, a lot better than this, and I gave that 50%. This film, I think actually, it really doesn't even deserve, say, a 1.5 stars from me. That would what. A high 20% would be. I think it's actually, worse than that, and I think due to everything, taking everything into account, how it made me feel, which was basically nothing, and just boredom, and just kind of frustration, this is not comparing it to the original for the score, but again, compared to the original and just all of the sequels, it can't even manage that. I think this is really, really bad stuff. Very little to actually say is decent in the film even, and nothing is very good or great. Even the production, even the score, and the fact that Tim Roth and everyone involved, really there, are so bad in the film actually. The script is awful, and the fact that it's so lifeless, so dull. The cinematography, the editing is just messy. The action scenes, actually, I will say now, it could be worse than Battle for the Planet of the Apes, so the worst action in the franchise. This film, I'd have to give, and it's between two numbers, 25 and a 24. And you know what, I'd have to give it a 24%. I think it's hard for me to actually bump it up, higher than that. This is very bad, I think it's pretty much as bad as I remembered, and I still hate it as much, and, I detest this film, I think it really is, it's just by far the worst Planet of the Apes film. By far the worst of Tim Burton. If he ever makes a film worse than this, I will be surprised. And he's a great director. Much respect for Tim Burton. He, went on form, a genius. There's no denying that. But a lot of his stuff, admit it, is not good, really. And this is by far his worst. That I've seen. To be, a lot worse than Dark Shadows. Is quite an achievement. This is one of the worst, remakes of all time. Easily up, very, very worst. A lot worse than Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. That had a couple of things going for it, including some of the visuals. The visuals in this, really, are awful for the most part. Even the battle scenes, they look like, as they were staging it, bringing it up, looked like it could be a promising. But even that turned out to be very, very boring, messy, and just, ugly. This film, it's really bad. 24%, is a really, really bad score from me, of course. And it's just a film I absolutely hate, really. Apart from that opening, I hate the rest of the film, really. I hate how it ends. I think it's just bizarre and just one of the worst endings I've ever seen. This film is depressing in every way, and it has no place, for me. Within the franchise, I think there'll never be a worse Planet of the Apes film than this, surely. And I've said enough, respect to everyone involved, but on this occasion, and this is the honest answer for me, it's just really, really bad, and absolutely hate it, and that is, one of the most it's one of my most hated films. I despise this film, you know, for what it does and how, you know, soulless it is and just crap. Really crap, this film. Do not watch it, you know, if you think, you know, that you want to just... Yeah, just don't watch the film, you know, unless you want to see how bad it is or you do actually like the film, which of course, as always, is great. I understand if people, you know, have different opinions and everything like that. Respect to the opinions, but wow, for me, I hate it, you know, and this is my opinion, my review, and I really despise the film. You know, I hate it. I really do, and that's all I would say. I've said enough. I've hated, you know, this film enough. I'm not hating on it, you know, I'm not a hater, you know, an automatic hater. It's for a reason, and the reasons are nothing works. I hate everything about the film, really, and it is a really, really bad Planet of the Apes film. Not good sci-fi, not good action. Very bad, and yes. Luckily, we'll end on a high note, and you know, I will be buying Rise of the Planet Apes on Blu-ray probably very, very soon. And then, of course, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes Steelbook, and of course 4K Steelbook War. Now, I'll be watching them, and yes, of course, they're all at least very good for me. So yes, thanks for watching my review of Tim Burton's absolute travesty, Planet of the Apes.